despite Job being humble about losing everything, he's called righteous by God and he's theologically correct. God wants Job to know there is one thing he can't tame, and that is his own and other people's pride. That's God's domain. God is in control of pride. He created it. He created Leviathan, and only he can change the heart of a person. So, in our discussion after the first session, we were saying that, God is in control of pride. He is the only one that can tame it. So we can go some ways to I think we have to understand what pride is in us. It is a monster. It does lurk beneath the surface in all of us. And taming it is very hard. And it's the gift of God. It's the love of God, really, that is what subdues it and controls it. If we look at what the Bible says about what we can control.
So Tom, to stop you there, can you tell us what you're going to tell us in the next 20 minutes?
Right, yeah. Say what I'm going to say. Okay, so we're going to look at what we can control. We're going to try and do some self-awareness, look at how our world is put together, how we view the world, and see what happens when people disrupt our worldview, and what our triggers are for becoming proud. And hopefully that's the next 20 minutes. Does that make sense? It all makes sense.
I think so, yes. So we can only be aware of our own difficulties when we're having interactions with people. And looking at Job, who's like one of the best examples in the Bible, the one time when he was tripped up and he became proud, was when those feelings were triggered off by his friends. So yeah, I think we're going to look at why you might get influenced or caused to react in certain ways, which aren't kind of useful dialogue.
Yeah, the friends really tap into Job's insecurity of wanting to be in control of everything by trying to take that control. But here's two verses that show us what we can be in control of. Galatians 5, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law, and those who belong to Christ crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Self-control. We can try and develop that. We can try and learn that. Peter says we should make every effort to supplement to our faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control. I think it's interesting that you add self-control to knowledge, because when you think you know everything, that's when you need to have some self-control about how you deal with all that knowledge. And then steadfastness, to steadfastness, godliness, and to godliness, brotherly affection, and with brotherly affection, love. So again, love is bound up in both those verses as well. My favourite verse about all this is 2 Timothy 2. This is brilliant for me. It shows us exactly what we can do and exactly what we can't do. So it says, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. We've learned that. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone. Job and his friends weren't particularly kind to each other. Able to teach. I don't think they were particularly good at teaching each other. They weren't patiently enduring evil very well either. And they weren't correcting each other with gentleness. So the things we must do is patiently endure other people, whether we think they're evil or not, be able to teach in a kind way, in a way that is gentle. And then it says, God may perhaps grant them repentance. Whether that person changes their mind and they turn around from what they think is not actually much to do with us. It's God that grants them that and leads them to a knowledge of the truth. And then ties it in with the kind of idea of the devil in Job as well. They may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will, after being captured in the jaws of Leviathan, after being captured by those provoking prods from people, and we may come to our senses. So let's shift from trying to control each other to trying to understand each other. And to understand each other, you first have to understand yourself. I think it's important. This is where we get into the idea of worldviews and kind of self-awareness. If we can understand ourselves, we have more empathy towards other people's worldviews and other people as well. This is a priority set by Jesus, of course. First, there's a couple of firsts that Jesus says. First, take the log from your own eye. So let's be introspective. Let's look at ourselves and understand ourselves. First, wash the inside of the cup before we try and point out other people's flaws or try and change anybody else.
Is that your cartoon?
That's not my cartoon, no. In fact, that's terrible crediting to the artist. I'm sorry, artist. Right, we're going to move on to something which kind of delves into some psychology. Hopefully it's interesting. pipe up if you're losing me. But we all have different worldviews. We all have different ways of seeing the world and understanding the world. If I can understand what happens when my worldview is challenged, we can empathize with others when we challenge theirs. We're going to go into this idea of the worldview. What am I talking about with worldview? So Job and his three friends, they were challenging each other's worldviews. Job's three friends had an idea that good people were rewarded and bad people were punished. They lived in reality. They had all their senses. They saw things, they experienced things, and they tried to tie it into this worldview that they had, this idea of divine retribution. And what they do, when they see Job, who's a righteous person, he's a good person, he should have good things. When they see him suffer and lose everything, they have to try and match that with their worldview. They have to try and align it because it's in dissonance at the moment with their worldview. They have to develop a narrative, they have to develop a map that links their reality to their worldview. They have to compose a story. So they start making stuff up about Job. They start making a narrative about Job that they haven't seen, but it ties it in with bad people, bad things happen. Make up a narrative. So what is this narrative that I'm talking about? The narrative is the map. If we can map from our reality to our worldview, we might have an idea about how the world works. And if we can look out into the world and say, so I believe the world's round, all right? So if I can look at things that mean that the world is round, I can't think of it off the top of my head now I've said that. I can look at some science and say, yes, that matches my worldview, that matches my worldview, that fact matches my worldview. That will form part of my narrative to conclude that the world is round. Obviously, some people think the world is flat, and they pick up different parts of stories, conspiracy theories, and they try and make a narrative of conspiracy and all sorts of things to make their reality match their worldview. And as humans, we want harmony. We want these things to align properly. So yeah, narrative. So Job's friends have an unhealthy narrative. This narrative skews their reality because the reality is Job's righteous, but their narrative pulls reality away from being correct.
So Job's friends have the idea of divine retribution. Then they look at their friend Job, who they know is a good man, and he's suffering. So those things don't match up. So then they have to they accuse him of things, don't they? Yeah. And make up stuff that he's probably done. They begin to warp reality. So they do this. They say, okay, reality is Job is righteous, but because our worldview is over off on this side, it's kind of points towards divine retribution. We have a dissonance. So we have to change something. And we're going to change reality. We're going to move the truth. And we're going to twist it to have harmony with our worldview. We're going to say, Job, he's not righteous. He's actually absolutely crooked. And that matches our worldview of divine retribution. Unfortunately, that's at odds with the truth. So there is a truth in the world. There is an objective truth to the matter. And God has stated it, that Job is righteous. And they are now at odds with that. And when our worldview is at odds with the truth, it will at some point come crashing down and it will be exposed as in error. Or you just become more and more insular and go back into your conspiracy theories or
you surround yourself with people who maybe believe the same thing as you to kind of cushion yourself from the truth. So essentially, if we think about the New Testament, we think about what many people's idea of what the Messiah was going to be. They had maybe a narrative that wasn't quite right. Well, it wasn't right at all. Their narrative of the Messiah was wanting to come and destroy the Romans, going to kill their enemies and set up as a ruler. And Jesus comes along and he doesn't harmonize with their idea of the Messiah. He doesn't match their reality of the Messiah. And so he creates a lot of dissonance for people. And it's very hard to accept that dissonance in our lives, because changing our worldview and changing our narrative that maybe we've had all our lives, maybe we've structured around so many social things, is really hard to change. Job's three friends probably had this idea of divine retribution all their lives. Their families probably believed it. Their community probably depended on it. Their social interactions probably acknowledged it. And so to change that is going to be really, really hard. And that's why this idea of trying to change other people's worldviews, people's perspective on reality, is kind of really impossible for us to do. It can only really happen through their own experiences, guiding them, and God in their lives working through them.
And there's an idea that the ideas and the things you hold as true and important are more of a social thing. They're actually aligned to kind of what tribe you see yourself being in.
Yeah, well, I've got a slide for that in a second.
Right.
This is a really nice quote from Haruki Murakami, who's a Japanese writer. Name we found it. It says, "Always remember that to argue and win is to break down the reality of the person you are arguing against. It is painful to lose your reality, so be kind, even if you are right." I think that's so poignant and powerful. Like, even if you're right, you have to be kind, because what you're deconstructing for the other person could be their entire reality, and it may leave them with nothing to guide their lives with. So someone comes along and they say to you, "Here's my worldview, all right? I've got it nice and balanced. It's all in harmony for me. My narrative matches my reality." And someone comes up to me and say, "What you believe is wrong," and they twist my world. They say, "Here's some facts that change everything." We can think this happens in history. We used to think that the sun revolved around the earth, right? We used to think that that was the way the solar system worked. When Galileo and his contemporaries came along and said, "Actually, we find that the earth revolves around the sun. You're wrong." And they twist some things, not twist it as in they manipulate it. They actually present the actual facts of things and provide some science to say, "Here's how this works." And the rest of the world couldn't handle it. They tried to hide from that truth. They tried to deny that truth until eventually the truth, became apparent. But when someone comes into your worldview, turn reality like that, it can be very painful for us, because it can actually destroy our narrative. It can destroy our worldview. We can be left with just an uncharted territory. Now, without my worldview, without my narrative, I've got no map to organize myself in the world, and we get a little bit spun out.
So in that example of when people believe that the sun revolved around the earth, there was also a kind of subconscious, and I guess in some ways conscious idea of that's because humans are so important. Like, God has made us, he's put us there, and everything else revolves around the earth. Whereas the idea that actually, no, the earth is part of another complex thing, and the earth actually revolves around other things, which revolve around other things. Yeah, that is scary. And also that would have gone against certain people's pride as well, to the idea of, hang on, so if, literally, if everything doesn't revolve around me, then what does that mean? What other aspects of the cosmic universe aren't about me? And that kind of thing. So actually it's really, really quite scary. So that's why it was
there was a deeply religious significance to everything revolving around God's created earth, and people rejected the idea that the earth revolves around the sun on religious grounds. And it was a real challenge for some people to change that idea. Here's another sort of example. You've grown up at your home ecclesia, and you've become accustomed to the way that they do things, and that's harmonizing with you. You've made sense of it all, and then maybe you move away to university, and you hear lots of different ideas at university. Maybe you go to a different sort of ecclesia. It's just different to the way that you think about things, and it begins to give you different ideas, different ways of seeing the world. And to go home again and share those ideas can be a challenge, because that everybody at home is kind of fixed in kind of a particular space, or at least you think they are. And to bring in new ideas might be a challenge, and it might be hard to do that. And for you to be in a whole different tribe of people that believe something different to you really can have an influence on you and change the way that you think, provide you with perspectives that you didn't see before. Here's a little tribe of people. They all think the same thing there. They're in a nice little bubble, and they're all harmonized together. And then someone comes along and goes, "Oi, nah, you're all wrong. This is how it is. I've got a totally different worldview to you." As humans, the first thing that we're often going to do is, rather than look at the facts that that person are presenting to us or the logic behind their worldview, we'll maybe have a little look around at our group of people and go, "Oh, everyone else seems to be dealing with this guy in the same way. They're still in harmony. Maybe I don't need to even think about what that person's saying. I can just, my group protects me from these new ideas. I don't need to think about them."
Also, that person thinking about the consequence of what would happen to leave their tribe and have to change everything.
Yeah, if I go over to that guy and start hanging out with him or her, and I form a new group, what are my family, friends, culture, what are they all going to think about me? If I change, what's going to happen?
An illustration you used when we did it in the podcast was talking about when you speak to JWs, and like it's always kind of really enjoyable, have a nice chat with them, they're really, really friendly, but ultimately the conversations that you're having are almost, apart from the nice social interaction you get and thinking about ideas, ultimately neither of you are going to convince the other, because it would mean that they then have to leave their tribe of Jehovah's Witnesses and become a Christadelphian with you, or you have to leave everything you've ever known and become a Jehovah's Witness.
I hate it when people interrupt speakers, but I'm going to interrupt you just to say that we do have some ex-JWs amongst the group here, so we can hopefully pick up that and chat to them about that point later.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
So it's a huge thing, yeah. Kind of the point is you're not just having a theological debate going, oh, yes, okay, well maybe I do believe in Muhammad then, great. Like it's not just kind of making that academic idea in your head, it's actually your beliefs affect your entire lifestyle and your culture that you belong to.
Yeah. And so it'd be interesting to hear how that change affected those people who were Jehovah's Witnesses. It really changes everything for you. Your entire group dynamic and everyone you know will treat you differently, and everything will change. But some people will do that for the truth. I think it's a very small amount of people that are able to do that and take that step. But I think that's where we have to have faith and think, okay, is what we're believing actually true? We need to explore this for ourselves, and I need to kind of think about, in terms of self-awareness, what do I believe? Let's take ownership for what we believe. Let's actually do the study ourselves, and we need to think about our congregations, our ecclesias, and our meetings, about how we facilitate that self-learning. And often sometimes somebody else does all the learning from the front, and they give it to you and they go, here's the path that's laid out for us, you take that path. Whereas when we have more discussion groups, when we have more ability to facilitate self-learning, we can learn for ourselves. I think I'm going to stop there for a bit of discussion. Maybe I'll just do a little recap. So what have we thought about? We've thought about worldviews, how we like to harmonize our worldviews. And as humans, we like a harmonized worldview. When things become dissonant, that's when fear arrives in our lives. When our reality doesn't match our worldview, we're like, I haven't mapped this. I haven't got a plan for this part of my life. I need to try and I need to Google everything I can possibly Google. I can, maybe I need to ask my elders. I need to ask parents, I need to ask people that have it sorted out, so that I can maybe understand from their perspective how things work. Yeah, there's this whole group dynamic thing where actually to change out of our group is really hard. We're very tribal people. We've developed in that kind of a way to have safety in those numbers, and have safety in how other people have it together. It's like, if that person has it together and it makes sense to them, then that's as good as it making sense to me sometimes. Actually working out your own salvation with trembling and fear. And it's with trembling and fear, because I think that's a really interesting way of phrasing it. You have to step into that unknown sometimes of, okay, maybe I don't know about head coverings. Maybe I haven't even really figured that out for myself. I know everyone else is doing this, but okay, what if I make my own path into this thing about head coverings, or about sexuality, or about women's roles, these kind of things that are actually quite big unknowns for a lot of people. Often I find people say, like, what's your opinion on sisters' roles? And like, well, I don't really know. I haven't looked into it, is sometimes the answer. And finding the time to look into it is a real challenge. I mean, it's not easy.
Could I?
Yes.
Also, just say, so the point of this is thinking about when we come and have conversations with people, when you sometimes have conflict with people, or you're surprised by their extreme reaction. It's never just like the content of what you're saying. It's thinking about those things, and actually if that person is convinced, or if you're convinced by them, actually that might mean quite big changes for you, or big deconstructions of the faith that you've kind of built up, which all results in kind of cognitive dissonance. And yeah, it's just very unpleasant, and basically our brains would just do anything to avoid that, basically.
Yeah, you have to be a certain type of person to deal with dissonance.
Yeah, and make those massive changes, absolutely.
Sometimes practicing dealing with dissonance, like saying that. Sometimes practicing dealing with dissonance is a really healthy thing to do, to be able to hold things in limbo a little bit, without panicking, without freaking out and going, oh, I have to put this in a box and tidy it away and make sure that it's safe, is really important. And it's something that, as in groups, we're not very good at doing it. Someone's like, I want to take this out of the box. I want to unpack this and you're like, I've tidied that box. I put my head coverings theology away 10 years ago. I dealt with all that and I understand it. Don't get it back out again. Kind of that dissonance is very much just under the surface, and that causes us to be terrified by things. Right,